Good evening, my friend, and welcome to your sleep story. A tender little escape to wrap you in peace and carry you off to a restful night. I'm Caleb Weston, 38 years young, a storyteller from the rolling hills of America's heart, and it's my deep honor to be the voice guiding you into dreamland tonight. This story's a special one, penned by my dear niece, Lily Harper, who's got a knack for weaving tales that tug at the soul. It's a beautifully heartfelt journey set in the misty mountains of Appalachia, right here in the States. And it centers on an unlikely friendship between two folks you'd never peg as kindred spirits. You'll follow along as the older one, wise and weathered, teaches the younger the ancient art of hand-weaving. Those old ways of crafting cloth that hum with history. And then you'll see how this young woman uses that craft to honor the memory of someone she loved fierce and true. I hope it settles into your heart as soft as a lullaby, easing you into a deep, dreamy calm. Before we dive in, a quick note. If these stories are helping you drift off and you'd like to toss a little support my way, you can do so through Patreon. The link's right below this video, and I'd be mighty grateful for any kindness you share. It keeps me spinning these tales for you, night after night. Now, let's ease into a little relaxation session to melt away the day. It'll take just a few minutes before we step into tonight's story. I'll count down from 10 to 1, slow and steady. And with each number, let yourself sink deeper, let go a little more, like leaves drifting down a quiet stream. Picture my voice as a warm lantern, lighting your way to a safe, gentle place. Ready? Let's begin. 10. Feel the bed beneath you, solid and sure, cradling you like an old oak holds the earth. Or maybe it's the floor, cool and steady. Whatever it is, beneath it all, sense the ground, our planet, holding you tight, keeping you safe. Let that support seep into you, loosening your edges, letting you breathe a little easier. 9. You're safe here, wrapped in this moment. Let my voice be your anchor, steady and warm, a friend you can trust. No, I'll only lead you to peaceful places, misty mountains, whispering winds, and with that certainty, sink deeper now, shedding the day's weight like a heavy coat slipping off your shoulders. 8. Tune into your body, wander through it soft and slow. Where's it holding tight? Maybe your feet ache from the day's steps, or your hands are clenched from gripping too hard. Could be your chest feels heavy, or your brows furrowed tight. Me, I carry it in my neck, stiff as a board. Wherever it is, breathe into it now. Let it soften. Let it melt away like frost under a morning sun. 7. The day's done, sealed tight behind you. Whatever's happened, it's gone. Whatever's coming, it'll wait. Thoughts might flicker, little sparks of tomorrow's worries or today's echoes. Don't wrestle them, don't push them away. Greet them quiet. See them for what they are, just passing whispers, and watch them drift off, floating like fireflies in a twilight breeze or mist curling over a mountain ridge. 6. This is your moment, your slice of stillness. Nowhere to rush, nothing to chase. Let that truth settle deep, pulling you closer to now, stripping away the noise. Feel your breath slow, your edges soften, sinking into this sweet, quiet pocket of peace like sinking into a warm quilt on a chilly night. 5. Maybe a little gratitude's blooming now, soft and warm. For this breath filling your lungs, steady and alive. For the roof over your head, the walls keeping you safe. For the folks who light up your world, simple things, sturdy things. Peace lives in you, a faithful friend, waiting to be felt. Reach for it now. Find that calm. Let it glow gentle and deep. 4. Your body's unwinding, heavy and loose, ready to rest after carrying you through the day. Give it that gift. Let it sink. Let it sigh. Every muscle easing into the stillness, like a river smoothing over stones. 3. Fire up your imagination now. Let it stretch wide and wild. Picture the misty hills of Appalachia, a land of rolling green ridges and whispering pines, where a young woman steps off a creaky bus, her heart heavy but hopeful, heading to a mountain village far from the bustle you know. 2. Check in with your body one last time, my friend. It's worked hard for you today, carrying you through every step, every moment. Now, let it rest. Let your arms flop heavy, your legs melt into the bed, your breath slow to a whisper, like the wind rustling through Appalachian pines. 1. Completely let go now, sinking deep into this stillness, ready to drift. You're standing on the edge of a new story, wrapped in the misty hills. As I guide you into tonight's sleep tale, let's step in together. Here we go. Here we are, my friend, stepping into the misty heart of Appalachia, where the mountains whisper secrets and the air hums with the weight of history. The old bus creaked to a stop at the edge of a sleepy village in West Virginia, its engine coughing a tired sigh as the doors hissed open. Eleanor Carter, Ellie to those who knew her best, stepped off, her boots scuffing the gravel, a worn duffel bag slung over her shoulder and a small backpack hanging light on her back. The air hit her sharp and cool, laced with the earthy tang of pine and damp moss, a scent that tugged her straight back to childhood. She was 28 now, but standing here, in the shadow of the Blue Ridge Mountains, she felt like a little girl again, chasing fireflies through the twilight with her daddy's laughter echoing behind her. Ellie hadn't come back to Hazelwood for a weekend escape or a nostalgic stroll. It had been 2 months since her father, Samuel Carter, passed. A quiet man with hands that could coax magic from a loom, weaving blankets and tapestries that held the soul of these hills. His death had left a hollow ache in her chest, a grief that clung stubborn like morning fog in the hollers. She was here to sort through his things, to tend to the little cabin he'd called home, and to face the memories she'd tucked away when she left for the city years ago. The bus rumbled off, its taillights fading into the dusk, leaving her alone on the empty road. The village stretching out quiet and unchanged before her. She started walking, the gravel crunching soft underfoot, her breath fogging in the chilly air. Hazelwood hadn't shifted much in the decade since she'd last been here. The wooden cabins lined the road, their porches sagging gentle with age, their tin roofs glinting under the last rays of a fading sun. Smoke curled lazy from chimneys, carrying the scent of burning hickory, and somewhere in the distance a banjo plucked a lonesome tune, its notes drifting like a ghost through the pines. Ellie passed old neighbors, Mrs. Grady hanging laundry, Mr. Thompson whittling on his stoop, and offered a shy wave, their nods warm but curious, as if they could see the weight she carried in her steps. The Carter cabin sat at the far end of the village, nestled against a wooded rise where the mountain sloped down to meet a babbling creek. Ellie pushed open the gate, its hinges squeaking a mournful welcome, and paused at the threshold, her hand trembling on the doorknob. The house loomed small but sturdy, its clapboard siding weathered gray, the porch cluttered with her daddy's old rocking chair and a stack of firewood he'd never get to burn. She stepped inside, kicking off her boots at the door, the familiar creak of the floorboards stirring a flood of memories that hit her hard and fast. Everything was just as Samuel had left it, frozen in time, only dusted with a thin layer of neglect. The air smelled of old wood and linseed oil, a scent that clung to her father like a second skin. The living room stretched out dim and quiet, the stone fireplace cold, its mantel lined with faded photographs. Ellie as a gap-toothed kid, her mama laughing in a field. Samuel at his loom, his face creased with focus. She trailed her fingers over the mantel, dust smudging her skin, and felt her throat tighten. This house had been her world once, a haven of warmth and laughter where every corner held a story, every knot in the wood a memory. She carried her bags to her old bedroom, the door creaking as she pushed it open. The room was a time capsule, her twin bed still draped in a patchwork quilt her mama had sewn, the walls papered with peeling florals, and a shelf above the desk cluttered with tiny woven trinkets she'd made as a child. Little coasters, a lopsided scarf, a doll's blanket, all clumsy but earnest, crafted under her daddy's patient eye. She sank onto the bed, the mattress sagging with a familiar groan, and ran her hand over the quilt, the stitches rough under her fingertips. Each square told a story, scraps from her mama's dresses, her daddy's old shirts, pieced together with love. Samuel Carter had been a master weaver, a keeper of Appalachia's ancient craft. He'd learned the old ways from his own father, who'd learned from his, a lineage of hands that spun thread into art, weaving blankets and rugs that carried the spirit of the mountains. Hazelwood was a weaver's village, a tight-knit community where looms hummed in nearly every home, where folks still dyed their yarn with walnut husks and indigo, and wove patterns passed down through generations. Samuel had moved his little family here when Ellie was just a baby, drawn to the village's traditions, its quiet rhythm. He'd set up his loom in the back room, a sacred space where the clack of the shuttle and the thump of the beater were the soundtrack of Ellie's childhood. She'd always been mesmerized by the process, watching her daddy card wool from their own sheep, spin it into thread on a creaky wheel, and weave it into something warm and beautiful. It felt like magic, the way he could take a tangle of fibers and turn it into a blanket that held the colors of a mountain sunset: deep purples, fiery oranges, soft greens. He taught her the basics, guiding her small hands on the loom, showing her how to thread the warp, how to beat the weft just so. But before she could master the old patterns, the intricate designs that told stories of the land, she'd left for Asheville to study modern textile design at a fancy art school. There, she'd learned sleek techniques, digital looms, synthetic dyes, avant-garde patterns that won her awards but felt hollow compared to the warmth of her daddy's craft. Now, standing in the doorway of his weaving room, the ache of regret settled heavy in her chest. She'd always meant to come back, to sit at his loom again, to learn the old ways proper, but life in the city had swept her up. Deadlines, exhibitions, a whirlwind of noise. And by the time she'd made space to return, Samuel had fallen ill, too weak to teach her the patterns he'd carried in his hands. She'd savored every moment with him in those final months, but the what-ifs lingered, sharp and bitter. If only she'd come sooner, if only she'd listened closer. The loom sat silent now, its threads dusty, its wood worn smooth by years of her daddy's touch. Ellie traced the edge of the bench, her fingers trembling, and made a quiet promise to honor him, to weave again, to keep his legacy alive in these hills. The weaving room door creaked open, its hinges groaning a mournful note as Ellie stepped inside, her breath catching in the dim, dusty light. The space felt sacred, a quiet shrine to her father's craft, untouched since Samuel Carter's hands last worked the loom. The air hung heavy with the scent of aged wood and wool, a faint tang of linseed oil clinging to the walls. Ellie felt the weight of memory settle over her like a shawl. This room had been her daddy's sanctuary, a place where the steady clack of the shuttle and the rhythmic thump of the beater wove not just cloth but stories, tales of the mountains, of family, of a life rooted deep in Appalachia's soil. Now, standing here, with the ache of his absence sharp in her chest, Ellie knew what she had to do. She'd learn the old ways of weaving, the traditional patterns her father had mastered, to honor his legacy and keep his spirit alive in every thread she spun. The room stretched out small but cluttered, a testament to Samuel's years of devotion. The loom dominated the space, a sturdy oak frame, its wood worn smooth by decades of touch, its warp threads sagging loose, dusted with neglect. Shelves lined the walls, bowing under the weight of skeins of yarn, their colors muted but rich, deep indigo, fiery crimson, soft moss green, all dyed by hand with the old methods, using walnut husks, goldenrod, and pokeberries from the hills. Baskets of raw wool sat in the corner, fleecy and tangled, waiting to be carded and spun, and a spinning wheel stood by the window, its wheel still, its treadle silent. Ellie trailed her fingers over the loom's bench, the wood cool under her skin, and felt a pang of longing so fierce it stole her breath. This was where her daddy had poured his heart, where he'd taught her to thread a needle, to feel the rhythm of the weave. She'd been too young, too eager to chase the city's bright lights, to truly learn his craft then. But now, she'd make it right. Fueled by a quiet determination, Ellie rolled up her sleeves and got to work. The room was a mess, a testament to the months it had sat untouched since Samuel's illness took hold. Dust coated everything, a fine gray veil that dulled the yarn's vibrancy, and cobwebs draped the corners like ghostly lace, swaying in the draft from the cracked window. She started with the shelves, wiping down each skein of yarn with a damp cloth, her hands trembling as she handled the colors her daddy had loved. Colors he'd pulled from the land itself, boiled in iron pots over a fire in the yard. The indigo felt like the twilight sky over the blue ridge, the crimson like the sumac in fall, the green like the moss on the creek rocks. Each skein was a piece of him, a thread of his soul, and she arranged them neat and careful, her fingers lingering on the textures, soft and rough, as if she could feel his presence in the fibers. Next, she turned to the floor, sweeping away the grit and leaves that had blown in through the window. The broom's bristles scratching a steady rhythm against the worn planks. She scrubbed at stubborn stains, splashes of dye, bits of wool stuck in the cracks, her arms aching as she worked, but the effort felt right, like a cleansing, a way to honor the space her daddy had cherished. The spinning wheel came next, its wood creaking as she dusted it, the wheel spinning slow with a mournful whine when she gave it a nudge. She found a small basket of carding combs on the shelf, their teeth clogged with bits of fleece, and cleaned them careful, the metal glinting in the faint light filtering through the window. Every motion felt like a promise, to her daddy, to herself, that she'd bring this room back to life, that she'd weave again, that she'd carry his craft forward. As she worked, Ellie uncovered treasures her father had left behind, half-finished projects, each one a glimpse into his final days. On a low shelf, she found a blanket, its warp still on the loom, the weft only half woven, its pattern a familiar one. The wig rose, a design her daddy had loved, with its interlocking curves like a blooming flower. The yarn was a deep burgundy, shot through with threads of gold, and she could almost see him sitting there, his hands steady, his brow furrowed in focus as he worked the shuttle back and forth. She lifted the blanket, the wool soft against her cheek, and felt tears prick her eyes. He'd never finished it, never seen its beauty complete, but she would. She'd finish it for him, weave the last threads with her own hands, a tribute to the man who'd taught her to see the world through patterns and colors. Under the bench, she found a wooden box, its lid carved with a simple mountain ridge, the kind of quiet art her daddy had always favored. Inside were smaller pieces, scarves, table runners, a child's blanket, each one stamped with his mark, a tiny woven star in the corner, a symbol of the Carter family's craft. She ran her fingers over the star on a scarf, its threads a soft gray like the morning mist, and felt a rush of warmth, a connection to him that time couldn't break. These were his legacy, his love spun into cloth, and she'd make sure they weren't forgotten, that they'd live on through her. Finally, she turned to the loom itself, the heart of the room, the tool that had been her daddy's truest companion. Its threads were tangled, the warp sagging, the shuttle resting idle on the bench. She'd need to restring it, to set a new warp, to bring it back to life. It wouldn't be easy. She hadn't woven on a hand loom since she was a girl, and the modern looms she'd used in Asheville were a far cry from this ancient beast. But she'd learn, she'd practice, she'd make her hands remember the rhythm her daddy had taught her. She'd weave the old patterns, the wig rose, the lover's knot, the pine bloom, and she'd make something new, something that carried both her daddy's spirit and her own. Ellie stepped back, her hands on her hips, the room now cleaner, brighter, alive with possibility. The loom stood ready, the yarn waiting, the spinning wheel poised to hum again. She'd honor her daddy here, in this sacred space, by weaving the way he had, by keeping the old ways alive in these mountains. The night outside deepened, the crickets singing a soft lullaby, and Ellie felt a quiet peace settle in her chest, a promise taking root as she prepared to step into her father's craft. The morning sun crept over the blue ridge, spilling a soft golden glow through the cabin's windows as Ellie tied her hair back, her hands still dusted with the grit of yesterday's cleaning. The weaving room hummed with a quiet energy now, its shelves neat, the loom waiting like an old friend eager to sing again. But as she swept the last of the dust from the floor, a shadow fell across the doorway, and a gruff voice called out, sharp but familiar, cutting through the stillness. "Ellie Carter, you're making a racket loud enough to wake the whole holler. What's going on in there?" Ellie looked up, her broom pausing mid-sweep, and saw Jacob Hensley, Jake to most, standing in the doorway, his stooped frame leaning on a hickory cane, his weathered face creased with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. He was 78, a wiry man with a shock of white hair under a faded cap, his overalls patched at the knees, his boots caked with the red clay of the mountain trails. Jake had been her daddy's closest friend, a fellow weaver who'd spent decades at his own loom, crafting quilts and rugs that told the stories of Appalachia in every stitch. He lived just down the path, in a cabin nestled against a shady grove, and Ellie remembered him from her childhood. His gruff voice softened by a twinkle in his eye, his hands always busy with a shuttle or a skein of yarn. "Morning, Mr. Hensley," Ellie said, setting the broom aside and wiping her hands on her jeans, a shy smile tugging at her lips. "I'm fixing up Daddy's weaving room, trying to get it back in shape. I want to learn the old ways, the patterns he used to make, to keep his memory alive." Jake's sharp blue eyes roamed the room, taking in the tidied shelves, the dusted loom, the baskets of yarn glowing soft in the morning light. His gaze landed back on Ellie, hard and assessing, like he was weighing her words against the girl he'd known years ago. "That so?" he said finally, his voice low, gravelly as the creek rocks. "You think you can just pick up where Samuel left off? Weaving ain't just a craft, girl. It's a way of being, a language in the threads. You can't learn it from a book or a city school." Ellie felt a flush creep up her neck, but she held his stare, her voice steady despite the doubt flickering in her chest. "I know I've got a lot to learn, Mr. Hensley. I studied textiles in Asheville, modern stuff, electric looms, fancy dyes, but it's not the same. I want to weave like Daddy did, with the old patterns, the mountain ways. I want to honor him, to make something he'd be proud of." Jake grunted, shifting his weight on his cane, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Ellie thought he'd turn and walk away, leaving her to fumble through the craft alone. But then he sighed, a long, weary sound, and nodded slow, like he'd made up his mind about something heavy. "All right then," he said. "I'll teach you. Samuel would have wanted that, I reckon. But I ain't doing it for free. My garden's a mess, and these old bones can't keep up no more. You tend to it every morning, weed the beds, water the herbs, feed the chickens, and I'll show you how to weave proper. Deal?" Ellie's heart leapt, a grin breaking across her face like sunlight through the pines. "Deal," she said, her voice bright with relief, and she stuck out her hand. Jake shook it, his grip firm despite his years, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of warmth in his eyes, a hint of the man who'd once laughed with her daddy over a shared jug of cider. The next morning, Ellie woke with the dawn, the rooster's crow echoing through the holler as she pulled on her boots and headed down the path to Jake's place. His cabin sat tucked in a shady grove, its porch sagging under the weight of potted ferns, its tin roof glinting in the early light. The garden stretched out behind, a patchwork of beauty and chaos, a living canvas that spoke of Jake's love for the land. Raised beds brimmed with herbs, sage, thyme, and mint, their leaves releasing a sharp, earthy scent as she brushed past. Wildflowers dotted the edges, their blooms a riot of color. black-eyed Susans with their sunny yellow petals, purple cone flowers swaying tall, and delicate Queen Anne's lace trembling in the breeze. A small vegetable patch hugged the fence, its rows of beans and tomatoes tangled with weeds, and a handful of chickens clucked soft in their coop, their feathers ruffled as they pecked at the dirt. Ellie started with the weeds, kneeling in the cool soil, her hands tugging at the stubborn roots of dandelions and chickweed, the earth staining her fingers a rich, rusty red. She worked slow and careful, the rhythm of the task soothing her, the morning air crisp against her skin. The chickens came next, their eager clucks rising as she scattered feed, their beaks darting quick to snatch the grains. She filled their water trough, the liquid glinting like glass in the sunlight, and watched them strut and preen, their soft chatter blending with the hum of bees in the wildflowers. The garden's heart was a small creek that trickled through the back, its banks lined with smooth stones and shaded by a gnarled dogwood tree, its branches heavy with white blooms. Ferns grew thick along the water, their fronds unfurling like green feathers, and Ellie sat for a moment, letting the creek's gentle babble wash over her. The sound was a lullaby, a whisper of the mountains that had cradled her childhood, and she felt a deep, quiet peace settle in her bones. A blue jay flitted overhead, its wings a flash of sapphire against the green, and the wind rustled the leaves, carrying the faint scent of honeysuckle from a nearby vine. As she pruned the sage, clipping back the woody stems, Ellie felt the garden's magic seep into her. A stillness, a connection to the land that her daddy had always understood. This was why Jake had asked her to tend it, she realized. Not just for the labor, but for the lesson. To weave the old ways, she'd need to feel the mountains in her hands, to know their rhythms, their colors, their quiet strength. She stood, brushing the dirt from her knees, and turned back toward her daddy's cabin, ready to learn, ready to weave, ready to honor him in every thread. The morning mist still clung to the holler as Ellie finished her chores in Jake's garden, the scent of sage and damp earth lingering on her hands. She brushed the dirt from her jeans and walked back to her daddy's cabin, her heart thrumming with a quiet excitement. Today was the day she'd start learning the old ways of weaving, the mountain craft her father had mastered, under the watchful eye of Jacob Hensley. She stepped into the weaving room, the air cool and still, the loom standing ready like a sentinel of the past. The shelves glowed with skeins of yarn, deep indigo, soft moss green, fiery crimson, all waiting to be spun into something beautiful, something that would honor her daddy's legacy. Jake was already there, his stooped frame hunched over the loom, his gnarled hands adjusting the warp threads with a precision that spoke of decades at the craft. He didn't look up as Ellie entered, his focus sharp, but his voice rumbled low, gruff as the gravel paths outside. "You're late, girl. Weaving waits for no one, neither does the mountain. Sit down, and let's see if you've got any of Samuel's grit in you." Ellie swallowed a nervous flutter, pulling up a stool beside him, her hands fidgeting in her lap. She'd woven before, as a child under her daddy's patient guidance, and later on sleek electric looms in Asheville. But this was different. This was the old way, the Appalachian way, a dance of hands and heart that carried the weight of generations. Jake started with the basics, his voice steady but firm, his words clipped like the snip of shears. "This here's a hand loom, none of that electric nonsense you learned in the city. It's all muscle and rhythm, a conversation between you and the threads. You gotta feel it, not force it. He showed her how to set the warp, threading the yarn through the heddles with a deftness that belied his years, his fingers moving like they knew the loom's every creak and sigh. Ellie watched, mesmerized, as the warp stretched taut across the frame, a canvas of indigo threads waiting for the weft to bring it to life. Jake handed her the shuttle, a smooth piece of maple, worn glossy by her daddy's hands, and nodded to the bench. Your turn. Start with a simple tabby weave. Over, under, over, under. Keep it steady and don't rush. Ellie slid onto the bench, the wood creaking under her weight, and gripped the shuttle, her palms slick with nerves. She'd woven tabby before, a basic pattern, but the electric looms in Asheville had done half the work. Motors humming, tension perfect, rhythm automatic. This hand loom was a beast of a different kind, its pedals heavy under her feet, its beater stiff as she pushed it forward. She started slow, passing the shuttle through the shed, her hands clumsy, the yarn snagging as she tried to beat the weft into place. The rhythm was off, her movements jerky, and the threads bunched unevenly, a lumpy mess forming on the loom. She bit her lip, frustration bubbling hot in her chest, but Jake's sharp eyes missed nothing. "Too fast?" he barked, his cane tapping the floor like a metronome. "You're fighting it, girl. The loom ain't your enemy. Work with it, not against it. Feel the beat like a heartbeat, steady and sure. Again." Ellie nodded, her cheeks flushing, and tried again, slower this time, her hands trembling as she passed the shuttle, her foot pressing the pedal with a hesitant creak. Over, under, over, under. She whispered the pattern to herself, trying to find the rhythm Jake spoke of, but the threads still twisted, the weave uneven, and she felt like a child again, fumbling under her daddy's patient gaze. Hours slipped by, the morning light shifting to a soft afternoon glow, the room filling with the steady creak of the loom and the faint rustle of yarn. Ellie's arms ached, her fingers cramped from gripping the shuttle, but she kept at it, driven by a stubborn determination to get it right. Jake watched, his expression stern, offering gruff corrections. Too tight, too loose. Keep your elbows down. But no praise, his silence a heavy weight. She managed a few rows of tabby weave, the cloth growing under her hands, a simple strip of indigo and gray. But it was far from perfect, the edges ragged, the tension spotty. In Asheville, she could have whipped up a scarf in half the time, but this hand loom demanded patience, a slowness she wasn't used to, a connection she hadn't yet found. By late afternoon, Ellie had woven a small square, nothing fancy, just a practice piece, but it was hers, the first thing she'd made on her daddy's loom since she was a girl. She held it up, the fabric rough but real, and felt a flicker of pride, a quiet warmth blooming in her chest. Jake glanced at it, his eyes narrowing, and gave a curt nod, the closest thing to approval she'd get. "It'll do," he said, his voice gruff. "But it ain't a Carter weave yet. Tomorrow we'll try a twill. More complex, more like what Samuel used to make. You've got a long way to go, girl." Ellie nodded, her shoulders sagging with exhaustion, but a smile tugged at her lips. She was tired. Her back ached from hunching over the loom, her legs stiff from working the pedals. But she felt alive, connected to her daddy in a way she hadn't in years. The weave in her hands was clumsy, far from the intricate patterns her father had crafted. But it was a start, a thread tying her to him, to the mountains, to the craft he'd loved. Jake stood, leaning on his cane, and shuffled toward the door, his parting words sharp but softer than before. "Get some rest. Weaving's hard on the body and the soul. You'll need both tomorrow." Ellie watched him go, the evening light casting long shadows across the room, the loom standing quiet now, its threads waiting for the next day's work. She ran her fingers over the practice square, feeling the uneven texture, the promise in its flaws. She'd learn, she'd grow, she'd weave the old patterns, the wig rose, the lover's knot, the pine bloom, and she'd make her daddy proud. The crickets began their nightly song outside, a gentle lullaby, and Ellie felt a deep, steady peace settle in her bones, a quiet certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The crisp air of late autumn settled over Hazelwood. The Blue Ridge Mountains cloaked in a patchwork of fiery oranges, deep reds, and soft golds as the leaves turned and fell, carpeting the ground in a rustling blanket. Ellie Carter stood in her daddy's weaving room, her hands calloused now from months at the loom, her shoulders strong from the steady rhythm of the pedals and shuttle. The shelves around her brimmed with her work, scarves, table runners, small blankets, all woven with the old patterns Jake Hensley had taught her. The lover's knot with its interlocking loops, the pine bloom with its sharp geometric stars, and the simple but sturdy tabby weave she'd mastered early on. Each piece was a step closer to her father's legacy, a thread tying her to Samuel Carter's craft, but they weren't finished yet. To truly honor the Appalachian way, she needed to dye them, to pull the colors of the mountains into the cloth with the same natural dyes her daddy had used. Walnut husks for a rich brown, goldenrod for a sunny yellow, indigo for a deep twilight blue. Ellie had spent the morning gathering what she needed, her boots crunching through the fallen leaves as she roamed the woods behind the cabin. She'd filled a basket with walnut husks, their dark shells staining her fingers as she cracked them open, and plucked handfuls of goldenrod from the meadow, their yellow blooms bright against the graying grass. The indigo paste she'd bought from a local dyer in town, a thick, pungent mix that smelled of earth and history. Back in the yard, she set up her dyeing station, an old iron pot over a fire pit, a wooden tub for soaking, and a line strung between two oaks to hang the cloth. The process would take a week, Jake had warned her, a slow, careful dance of heat and time, demanding her constant attention to keep the colors true. But Ellie was ready, her heart steady with purpose, her hands eager to bring her weaves to life. She started with the walnut dye, filling the iron pot with water from the creek, its surface glinting like glass in the morning light. The husks went in next, their dark shells tumbling into the pot with a soft splash, and she stirred them with a long stick, the water turning a murky brown as it heated over the fire. The flames crackled, sending sparks dancing into the air, and Ellie watched the pot simmer, the scent of wet earth and wood smoke rising thick around her. She soaked her first piece, a small table runner woven in a pine bloom pattern, in the tub, the cloth drinking up the water until it was heavy and dripping. Then, into the dye pot it went, the brown liquid swirling around it like a river over stones. She stirred gentle, her hands steady, keeping the cloth submerged as the color seeped in, turning the pale yarn a deep, earthy brown, the shade of the mountain soil after rain. For days, Ellie tended the dyes, her routine a quiet ritual that mirrored the slow rhythm of the mountains. She woke before dawn to stoke the fire, the chill biting at her fingers as she added more wood, the flames leaping eager to warm the pot. The walnut dye took 3 days to set, the table runner and a scarf emerging rich and warm, their patterns glowing against the deep brown like stars in a night sky. Next came the goldenrod, its yellow blooms boiling down to a sunny hue that turned a small blanket into a burst of summer light. The lover's knot pattern dancing across it like a meadow in bloom. The indigo was last, a tricky dye that needed careful tending to keep its blue true, and Ellie spent hours stirring the pot, her arms aching as the paste dissolved, the water turning a deep twilight blue that reminded her of the ridge at dusk. While the dyes simmered, Ellie turned her attention to a special project, a blanket in the wig rose pattern, her daddy's favorite, a design he'd woven into every piece he cherished. She'd found his half-finished blanket on the loom when she first arrived, its burgundy and gold threads a testament to his skill, and she'd vowed to make one of her own, to weave it exactly as he had, to honor him in every stitch. She'd set a new warp on the loom, using the same burgundy yarn he'd loved, shot through with gold, and started weaving, her hands trembling with the weight of the task. The wig rose was complex, its interlocking curves and floral shapes demanding precision, a steady rhythm she struggled to find. In Asheville, she'd woven bold, modern patterns with ease, but this hand loom, with its creaky petals and stubborn beater, fought her at every turn. She worked late into the nights, the cabin quiet save for the loom's steady clack and the cricket's soft song outside. The wig rose took shape under her hands, but it wasn't right. The curves were uneven, the roses lopsided, the tension too tight in some places, too loose in others. She'd woven a dozen rows, then ripped them out, her frustration mounting as the blanket refused to match her daddy's. His wig rose had been perfect, each petal sharp and graceful, the colors blending like a sunset over the ridge. Hers looked like a child's attempt, clumsy and wrong, and she felt a pang of failure, a fear that she'd never live up to his craft. She tried again, slower this time, her hands shaking as she passed the shuttle, her foot pressing the pedal with a hesitant creak, but the pattern still eluded her, the roses wilting under her touch. By the end of the week, the dyeing was done, the walnut, goldenrod, and indigo pieces hanging on the line, their colors glowing rich and true in the autumn light. Ellie stood back, her hands on her hips, a quiet pride blooming in her chest as she watched them sway in the breeze, the mountain colors alive in every thread. But the wig rose blanket lay unfinished on the loom, a reminder of her struggle, a challenge she wasn't ready to conquer yet. She'd keep at it, she promised herself, her daddy's memory urging her on. The fire in the pit died to embers, the air growing cool as the sun dipped low, and Ellie felt a deep, steady calm settle over her, the mountains whispering their approval as she prepared for the next step in her journey. The late autumn sun dipped low over the blue ridge, casting a golden glow across Hazelwood as Ellie Carter sat at her daddy's loom, the wig rose blanket still a stubborn challenge under her hands. For weeks, she'd wrestled with the pattern, trying to recreate the perfection of her father's work. Those graceful, interlocking roses in burgundy and gold that had always felt like a piece of the mountains themselves. But every attempt fell short, the curves uneven, the petals lopsided, the tension a mess of too tight and too loose. She'd ripped out row after row, her frustration a heavy knot in her chest, a fear that she was failing Samuel Carter's legacy. She wanted it to be exactly like his, a mirror of his skill, a tribute to the man who'd woven love into every thread. But the loom fought her. The pattern eluded her, and she felt the weight of her own inadequacy pressing down like a storm cloud over the ridge. Jake Hensley had watched her struggle, his sharp blue eyes missing nothing as he sat on the porch with a mug of cider, his cane resting against the rail. He'd been gruff through her training, his critiques sharp, too fast, too sloppy. Feel the rhythm, girl. But he'd seen her grow, seen the tabby weaves turn steady, the lover's knot patterns take shape, the pine bloom designs glow with mountain colors after dyeing. Now, as Ellie tore out another row, her hands trembling with frustration, he set his mug down with a clink and shuffled into the weaving room, his voice low but softer than usual. "You're trying too hard to be Samuel, Ellie," he said, his tone carrying the weight of years. "You can't weave a wig rose exactly like he did. You ain't him. You're his daughter, not his shadow. You've already honored him by bringing this old loom back to life. Make the pattern your own, girl. Let it speak for you." Ellie paused, the shuttle still in her hand, Jake's words sinking deep like rain into parched earth. She'd been so focused on copying her daddy's wig rose, on matching his every stitch, that she'd forgotten what weaving truly was. A story, a voice, a piece of the weaver's heart spun into cloth. She looked at the loom, the burgundy threads glowing in the evening light, and felt a shift inside her, a quiet release. She didn't have to be her daddy. She could be herself, weaving a wig rose that carried his spirit but sang with her own. That night, Ellie stayed up late, the cabin quiet save for the loom's gentle creak and the cricket's soft song outside. She started fresh, combining the old ways Jake had taught her with the modern techniques she'd learned in Asheville. She kept the burgundy and gold her daddy had loved, but she softened the rose's curves, making them fuller, more open, like the wild roses that bloomed along the creek in spring. She added a subtle border, a modern twist with thin stripes of indigo and gray, colors that echoed the misty ridge at dawn. Her hands moved steady now, the shuttle gliding smooth, the petals creaking a rhythm she finally felt in her bones. The wig rose took shape, not a copy of her daddy's but a blend of past and present, a pattern that was hers, Ellie Carter's, yet carried the echo of Samuel's love in every thread. She wove a small star into the corner, her daddy's mark, but added her initials beneath it, a quiet claim to her own place in the family's craft. When the blanket was done, Ellie dyed it with care, using the indigo to deepen the blues, the walnut husks to warm the golds, the colors settling rich and true. She hung it on the line to dry, the fabric swaying gentle in the mountain breeze, its roses glowing like a sunset over the holler. It was beautiful, unique, a perfect mix of tradition and her own vision, and Ellie felt a swell of pride, a deep, steady warmth that told her she'd done right by her daddy. But Ellie's journey didn't end with the blanket. She'd been dreaming of something bigger, a way to share her daddy's craft with the world, to keep the old ways alive for others to see. In Asheville, she'd made connections, gallery owners, textile artists, folks who loved the handmade and the heartfelt. She found a small storefront in town, a cozy space with big windows and wooden floors, perfect for a showcase. Over the next weeks, she worked with friends to set it up, painting the walls a soft gray, hanging shelves to display her daddy's weaves, his wig rose blanket, his pine bloom rugs, his lover's knot scarves. Another section held her own work, the pieces she'd dyed with mountain colors, and a few modern designs from her Asheville friends, some for sale, others just to show the craft's evolution. A special corner waited for Jake's work, though she hadn't told him yet, wanting it to be a surprise. The night before the opening, Ellie invited Jake over for supper, laying out a spread of cornbread, beans, and cider on the porch. She draped her wig rose blanket over the railing, its colors glowing in the lantern light, and watched Jake's eyes widen as he ran his fingers over the fabric, tracing the roses, the stripes, the star with her initials. "You did good, girl," he said, his voice rough with emotion, a rare softness breaking through his gruff exterior. "It's yours, but I see Samuel in it, his heart, his love for these hills. He'd be proud." Ellie smiled, her throat tight, and poured him a cup of cider from her new blanket's warmth. "I've got something else to show you, Mr. Hensley," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. "I opened a little gallery in Asheville, a place to show Daddy's work, mine and yours. There's a spot just for you, to share your weaves with the world." Jake's mug froze halfway to his lips, his eyes glistening as he looked at her, the weight of her words sinking in. He set the mug down, stood slow, and pulled her into a hug, his arms strong despite his years, his voice a whisper against her hair. "Thank you, Ellie. Samuel would be so proud to see you carry this on. I see so much of him in you." The next day, Ellie and Jake drove to Asheville, his best pieces, a quilt with a double wedding ring pattern, a rug in a log cabin design carefully packed in the truck. They set up his corner together, Jake arranging his work with a quiet pride, and that evening the gallery opened its doors. Folks flooded in, locals, tourists, friends from Ellie's art school days, admiring the weaves, running their hands over the textures, learning the stories behind the patterns. Jake stood by his display, his gruff demeanor softened by a shy smile, and Ellie watched from across the room, her heart full as she saw visitors linger over her daddy's wig rose, her own blanket beside it, a bridge between past and present. The mountains whispered their approval through the open windows, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine, and Ellie knew she'd found her place, her purpose, in the threads of Appalachia. The gallery's soft glow faded into the night as Ellie Carter locked the door, the hum of voices and laughter from the opening still echoing in her ears. She stepped onto the quiet streets of Asheville, the cool mountain air brushing her cheeks, carrying the faint scent of pine and wood smoke from the ridge beyond. Jake Hensley had stayed until the last guest left, his gruff voice softer than she'd ever heard, his hand resting on her shoulder as he'd said one last time, "Your daddy would be proud, girl." Those words wrapped around her heart like a warm quilt, a final thread tying her to Samuel Carter, to the mountains, to the craft she'd fought so hard to honor. She climbed into her truck, the wig rose blanket folded careful on the seat beside her, its burgundy and gold threads glowing faint in the moonlight, a testament to her journey, her growth, her love. The drive back to Hazelwood was a quiet one, the road winding through the dark holler, the Blue Ridge Mountains looming like gentle giants under a sky thick with stars. The truck's engine hummed a steady lullaby, its tires whispering over the gravel, and Ellie felt a deep, steady peace settle in her bones. a calm that came from knowing she'd done right by her daddy. The cabin welcomed her home, its windows dark but warm with the promise of rest, the porch creaking soft as she stepped inside. She lit a single lantern, its golden glow dancing over the weaving room, where the loom stood silent now, its work done for the day. The shelves glowed with her dyed weaves, walnut browns, goldenrod yellows, indigo blues, each piece a story, a memory, a bridge between past and present. Ellie sank into her daddy's old rocking chair by the hearth, the wig rose blanket draped over her lap, its weight a comfort, a hug from the mountains themselves. She ran her fingers over the star in the corner, her initials beneath it, and smiled, her eyes heavy with the day's end. The fire she'd lit earlier crackled soft, its embers glowing like fireflies, casting shadows that danced slow across the walls. Outside, the crickets sang their nightly song, a gentle chorus blending with the rustle of leaves in the breeze, the distant trickle of the creek, a whisper of the land's heartbeat. The mountains stood guard, their ridges a dark silhouette against the starry sky, their presence a steady, unwavering embrace. And now, my friend, let's drift together, letting Ellie's story fade into the night like a soft melody. Feel the warmth of the blanket around you, the glow of the fire, the hum of the mountains lulling you deeper. Your breath slows, your body sinks, heavy and loose, into the bed, the day melting away like mist in the morning sun. The crickets sing for you now. The breeze whispers your name, and the stars above Appalachia shine bright, guiding you into a deep, restful sleep. Good night, my friend. Dream of the mountains and let peace carry you away.